Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining from. Thank you so much for joining us today for the sixth spotlight session of the Big Brainstorm. A 2 week design sprint is happening around us as we speak, with over than 2050 young innovators from around the world coming together to develop solutions to global challenges, including for climate and sustainability, which is our topic today. My name is Butti Almheiri, and I work as an analyst at the Office of Strategic Affairs in Abu Dhabi, mainly managing sustainability projects. And I'm a member of the Arab Youth Council for Climate Change. It is my pleasure to be moderating today as the Next Generation Fellow for Climate with the UN Foundation. UN Foundation is supporting young change makers in shaping global agendas through collaborations like this. So I want to welcome many of our young innovators who are joining us today for advice and insights as they develop their solutions. Let me first do a short framing of the discussion. Despite more than 3 decades of a global climate diplomacy efforts, the likelihood of the crossing of the 1.5 degrees threshold in the coming 5 years is steadily rising, and national and global security risks induced by climate are multiplying. Luckily, we are joined by an incredible panel of speakers to guide us and discuss what key priorities we should collectively push in the climate space. We will discuss how can we accelerate scalable investments in financing to achieve the Paris targets, and how we can embed equity and justice in the transition to greener economies, partnering with people and communities mostly impacted. So no small task ahead of us. We will begin with a fireside chat with Jonathan Moyer, Associate Director, Pardee Center for International Futures, and Indu Murthy, Head of Climate, Environment and Sustainability, Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy. We'll follow this with a second fireside chat with Raha, Head of New Initiatives at Council of Energy, Environment and Water, and Dinah Sherrill, author and senior climate advisor for the Australian Council of a Trade Union. We will then have chance to ask some questions from young people in the chat to hear from all of you. So please do introduce yourself in the chat and share your questions and ideas as we go. We'll finish with a quick fire round asking a 1-minute answer question to all speakers. So I just want to check if Jonathan joined us already.
Hello, Butti, I'm here.
Hello, Jonathan. Nice to have you.
So thank you so much.
So let's begin with our first fireside. So Jonathan and Indu, we all know what the lack of financial resources is one of the most difficult issues in the climate negotiations. My question is, why and how can we accelerate investment into climate resilience? Can I ask Jonathan to go first and then Indu, please?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here. Thank you for the organizers. It's always a pleasure to engage with UN Foundation, and the topic is so important. A fireside chat is very appropriate because I come to you from very cold Denver, Colorado today. So thank you for having me. Why should we accelerate investment into climate resilience? When I think about climate resilience, I think about adaptation to a changing environment. And adaptation is one of the main pillars that we think about when we're researching the effect of climate change on human and social development. So when I think about adaptation, we're thinking about which populations need support when who will be vulnerable to changing patterns of weather, changing patterns of coastal storms, and changing patterns of food production and income generation. So we need this because, as Butti, you mentioned, we're almost certainly going to pass 1.5 degrees centigrade. And the models we would look at would suggest that we're going to go much further beyond 1.5 degrees as well. So climate change is a real issue, and it's going to become an increasingly pressing concern in the space of global development. How should we accelerate investment? This is the much more challenging part of the question, because there are lots of people who don't have interest in, there's a misalignment across all of these actors, right? We have many actors who make lots of money using fossil fuel production. We all benefit from fossil fuel production as well, because it is relatively cheap and relatively easy. So there is a complete misalignment of incentives to how to actually increase climate financing. And I think the fundamental problem is that our economic system is designed around a profit orientation that makes it increasingly difficult to do this, because this can sometimes run in contrast to the actual long-term interests of human development, because we're eating into the natural system resources that we need to survive in the future, especially for young people and future generations.
So my take on this, just to kind of add to this, like Jonathan said, he's from the cold Colorado. I'm sitting in the tropics, of course, in the southern part of India, which isn't too warm as yet. And generally, Bangalore is blessed with quite pleasant weather as compared to many other parts of India. That said, as he rightly said, we're witnessing more and more of these extreme events, which is kind of bringing into focus the need for addressing the elephant in the room. Yes, we need to cut down on emissions. We need to wean away from fossil fuels, but that's going to take some time. That's not going to happen tomorrow. But in the meantime, we have thousands and millions of population dependent on climate sensitive sectors, be it forestry, be it fisheries, be it agriculture. So given that, I think we can't just do away with the fossil fuels or wait for it to be done away. We really need to address the elephant in the room. I also think, we should see this as an opportunity to hit multiple birds with one stone, primarily because when you start investing in resilience, you're actually investing in all the key pillars of a society, or the 3 pillars of sustainability, be it natural resources, governance, infrastructure, healthcare, education, so on and so forth. The list is endless. And all these pillars, interestingly, are interconnected, and they provide feedback into one another. A simple example, strong local governance leads to better infrastructure. As a result, people are motivated to participate in the local governance, which is a feedback loop in itself. And the stronger these pillars, greater would be the ability for the society to bounce back after an adverse event, which is what resilience is all about. Now, once we build these resilient systems, be it communities or natural ecosystems, they don't just become resilient to climate change. I think that is the key message that we all need to be thinking about. It would help us to tide other disasters as well, economic shocks, epidemics, political unrest, so on and so forth. And of course, like Jonathan said, financing is the key to all of this, which I think countries around the world have been talking about it for quite some time. All said and done, there is some financing that's flowing in, but it's either highly specific or too broad. When you have to, what you have to understand is systems and resilience, and so that funds are directed efficiently. And also, we need to be understanding that climate finance or addressing climate change is not an added burden. You need to do a lot of things for development. So whatever benefits that you see as climate is actually an icing on the cake at the end of the day. So I think we need to kind of tie it down to better development that's sustainable, which is what I think the key to ensuring that there's more of finance that flows in. It could be developmental programs. India did announce about its own strategy, which is low emissions and low carbon strategy that it announced in the previous conference of parties. Now, that is the way forward. We shouldn't be looking at, yes, there is a need for technology, there's a need for some additional finance, but that's not the only thing that should drive action in this particular space.
Thank you, Indu and Jonathan, for these insights. Indeed, investing in adaptation and building resilience in low-income communities is very important toward climate change. So now my last question of this fireside chat, and this is posed within the context of the upcoming summit of the United Nations to review the progress of the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we ensure that the global climate goals are placed with our Sustainable Development Goals? Maybe this time, Indu, you can answer first, and then Jonathan.
I think I partly addressed this already. Like I said, when you try to look at sustainable development, there are three pillars. You need to look at the environment on which the societies are dependent on, and economies are built on it. So given that, I think developing economies have a unique opportunity and a challenge as well, because we are trying to balance climate action with achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And more importantly, in our effort to assure a desired quality of life, realization, the aspiration is something that needs to be met. Now, it's very clear that we cannot follow the same models of development of the currently developed economies. It's therefore imperative that we fundamentally change our perspective primarily, and we need to be able to embed climate goals into the developmental goals so that they're truly sustainable development. It's also an intelligent way of ensuring investments made remain intact over time. So even if from an economic perspective, I think it makes sense, but I think the narrative has to be very clear on this, which is what I think many people around the world, scientists, students, civil society organizations are trying to kind of build this narrative. And the recently enhanced the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions by several countries, and definitely India's, very clearly indicate that efforts are consistent as well as progressive targets are being placed towards decoupling emissions and economic growth. So I think that is the way forward. Evidently, a lot of effort on the national front, but to ensure the climate goals are not compromised, I think the global north must fulfill their responsibilities towards the global south via climate finance, which has been promised, which still has to kind of flow in. So ultimately, I believe, or rather we believe, an alternative to the classical economic framework that currently shape development of economies will explicitly take into account, if they explicitly take into account the planetary boundaries, limiting trade-offs and leverage the synergies, that's when climate goals and development both could be realized hand in hand.
Thank you, Indu. Indeed, NDCs are important tools to kind of follow up what the nations are doing towards their adaptation and mitigation efforts. So, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
This is a very complicated set of issues, and I really appreciate Indu's comments. There's a fundamental tension between development and climate change. So if we can stop development, if we can reduce economic growth, then we can slow climate change, right? But then development has impacts. Of course, we have to think about distributional effects too. Inequality is hugely important. There are things that can be done even in a world where we reduce our economic output in order to support lessen climate impacts. The more developed world contributed to climate change much more than the less developed world historically. It is primarily a global north created problem. And that should drive our thinking about what climate justice looks like, etc. But then the other complicating fact is that over the next 3 decades, we're going to add at least 2 billion people to this earth as well. And right now, 50% of carbon emissions come from the global north, and the rest come from the global south. Moving forward, because the global north's growth is much lower than the global south, which is what we would expect to see with the global south converging and achieving more sustainable development goals, poverty reduction, food insecurity improvements, etc., the majority of future emissions will come not from the global north. Balancing that tension, this is a train that has left the station. And if we want to ensure convergence and development in the global south, we will have a tremendous increase in emissions in the future. So these are fundamentally in tension. The only thing, when I study this, the thing I continually come back to is the importance of good governance, good local governance, and technology. If we don't get the technology transformation right, the shift towards global renewable energy that's sustainable, without additional problems created with all of the rare earth minerals that need to be used as inputs into battery storage technology, solar panels, etc. I mean, this is a really complicated challenge. We've never done this before to get the technology right. If we don't get that right, then climate change is much worse, and development will also suffer. So for me, I hate to be the technology will save us kind of person, but I think it's the only path forward for all of us. But it has to be really driven by local concerns with good, transparent governance that is inclusive, where we're continually trying to increase the number of people who have seats at the table and be sensitive to the voices that have traditionally been marginalized. I think that's the challenge for this generation. I think Dr. Murthy said it very well. All of these are integrated targets and goals. Everything is connected in this space. And developing countries are challenged to do everything simultaneously: good infrastructure, good schools, good health, good governance, with a growing population. These are tremendously large challenges. And when I was younger, I thought, I'm part of the future. I'm going to make the change that I want to see, and this world will be a better place. And as I get older, I keep thinking we need to increasingly rely on these younger generations who have access to this international information, who are engaged in these kinds of groups, to help us make decisions that can really bend the curve, but recognize that these growth and climate change stand in conflict with each other. And it's not simply one or the other. It has to be a more complicated understanding of the problem.
Indeed, Jonathan, it's very important to have this climate development nexus together. Thank you so much for your insights. So we will get to our second fireside chat. So unfortunately, Daniel Sharon was not able to join us today, but we will fortunately have another expert on the call. So we have Pelle Enarsson, a senior advisor at the UN Foundation, has been following the climate negotiations as a Swedish diplomat, and he was also a young climate activist, and will join us for this fireside with Raha. So my questions are, how can we embed equity and justice in the transition to greener economies? And how we partner with young people and the communities most negatively impacted? So let me first turn to Shuva.
Hi, Butti, and hi, Pelle, old friends here. Thank you for having me on the big brainstorm here. And because we're brainstorming, I'm going to sort of be a little provocative over here, if you will, because there are, the standard statements that we make at many forums, but I would like to challenge this a bit because I work for an organization called the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, where I head new initiatives, and my job is to look over the horizon. My team is called Fireside, the CEO's team, and we are looking at problems in a slightly different way. And when the COVID pandemic struck and the priorities of the governments worldwide changed to saving lives and livelihoods, and sustainability sort of took a backseat, is when we started thinking that what what have we done? We have divorced, sustainability from the mainstream. And whenever something happens, we push this to the side that, all right, we'll get back to this later on. So one of our efforts over the past several years has been to mainstream sustainability from the margins and bring it into the main conversation. And that is what we need to address, which is a whole of society, whole of economy, whole of government change. And it's not just one facet here or one facet there. Then we're not going to have a transformative change. And coming as I do from a developing economy that is India, and we have many of them in the global south, it's very important to understand that growth must happen, and it must happen on a low carbon pathway. And India right now is the first major economy in the world to attempt this, where we are developing, but we are at the same time embedding sustainability into every system that we are trying to develop now. And that involves many different aspects. And this is where the equity part of it comes in, because it involves every single person on, not just in India, but whoever interacts with us. And that's whether we are getting resource efficiency in. You've heard the word circular economy bandied about a lot. What does that mean? It means that we keep things and resources in play for as long as possible. We don't have the use and dispose culture. And that is not just individually. I mean, corporates need better design plans. Governments need to plan their natural resources, the country's resources better. And then we also have sustainable production and consumption being built into what we want as individuals, but also what we want as communities, as societies, how we define success, how we define materialism. These are questions that we have started looking into right now. And not just at an ethical level, but do we really need what we need? I mean, we need to redefine these metrics. That's where we are working. And that has led us to believe that there is beyond the energy transition, which is shifting from one energy type to another energy type, or one emission type to another emission type, we need to look at all in economic transformation. And I think my previous speakers touched on that everything is connected and everything must go together. Now, coming to the youth, we did a very interesting project last year. I want to take a minute to talk about it. The 50th year of the UN Conference on Environment, the Stockholm Plus 50, was held last year in Stockholm. And CEW and the Stockholm Environment Institute, the Swedish Environment Institute, together co-authored the official scientific report and the youth report on that. And we did this research with the youth, and this was involved about 1,000 young people between 18 to 30 across 91 countries. And we found that, and these are two big numbers, 88% of our respondents felt that they were impacted in some way by climate change, whether the weather, food systems, extreme events, etc. But here is a more worrying number, that 77% almost felt anxious and panicked about the fact that they were not being able to do something about this. And that also got us thinking that we were treating the youth as an isolated constituency, because they felt outside the power centers that they are feeling disenfranchised from being able to take action. But what I want to say is, and the average age in my organization is 28, we are very particular to take very young people, even if they are not the experts of their field, because that's when they're gaining that experience, and we must give them that opportunity. But it's important to understand that just like the sustainability is an economic-wide process, the youth, we have about 50% of India is under 30. And that's about an average that we're going to have for the world also going forward. So that's half our population. So half our population is not an exception to the rule. I mean, they are part of the problem and the solution, and they must own both. And what we think is that, yes, we define certain jobs as green jobs when they actually happen in the sectors like but every job needs to be treated as a green job, and everyone must bring that sensibility to any job that they do. Is what I'm doing sustainable? So these are the two ways that we're re-looking at the problems, if you will, instead of just looking at isolated fixes here and there. And if you look at vulnerable communities or impacted communities, I mean, they are vulnerable as a result of our action. They're not contributing to the cause. So unless we go back to root cause analysis and the first principles of looking at these problems, we'll not be able to solve them. So I'm going to pause there.
Thank you, Shuva. Very interesting points when it comes to the amount of youth who don't feel much optimistic about the future towards climate change. So I'll shift now to Pelle. Just to repeat the question, how can we embed equity and justice in the transition to greener economies? And how can we partner with young people and communities most negatively impacted?
Thank you, Butti, and a lot has already been said. Very wise words from the earlier panelists. I would actually like to emphasize what Shuva just said, that we cannot treat climate as an isolated issue. It needs to be embedded in a much broader program, and that's why we have the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's really about a full transformation of our societies, where climate, of course, is one of the major reasons we are working very hard, but it's not the only reason. We need to build a much broader effort. So the UN is working hard to do that. We are preparing now for the SDG summit coming up in September, but there will also be a summit for the future, most likely next September. And these two main meetings at the UN will actually give us an opportunity to drive towards a new direction with this more equitable approach. Now, when it comes to young people and involving other communities, I would say that young people are really the hope in this whole debate. You introduced me, Butti, as a young activist, but I have to say that was very many years ago. It was 1994, just after the Rio Conventions had been launched and the Framework Convention on Climate Change had been launched. The other day, I was cleaning up my basement, and I found an old tote bag which said COP3. So that just shows you how old I am. But in a way, I was in Kyoto in 1997 and at COP3, and we were negotiating late in the night, and it was really a quite hopeful moment until about 2 months later, when the American Congress refused to ratify Kyoto, and I, in a way, I almost lost hope that we were able to turn this in the right way. And then came Fridays for Future and the movement around Greta and other young activists from all around the world. And that has given me a lot of hope that actually this is possible. It is possible, and young people will dominate the world, are already dominating the world, I would say. And we have to remember that young people will be the majority soon, and that's why I have hope that we will actually achieve something.
Hopefully, Pelle, actually, I really hope. So moving on to the next question, Pelle, what are the critical factors to encourage global cooperation to achieve the goals outlined in the Paris Agreement?
Yeah. No, thanks. And I should have mentioned that maybe in my first, giving this history of my engagement in the climate field. But we at UN Foundation, we did a research paper last year that we issued, I think maybe 2 years ago now, about what the multilateral system has already delivered on climate change. And I think it's important for us, as Shuva, you were referring to those negative perspectives among young people, the desperation, etc. But we also have to remember that we have actually achieved things with our international cooperation. It's not good enough, absolutely not good enough. As you mentioned, Butti and Jonathan earlier, it seems that the 1.5 degree threshold will be hard, but we're still working towards that. But if we would not have had multilateral cooperation, actually we would be at more than 3 degrees heating already now. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that multilateral cooperation is delivering. We just need to make it even better. And so I think that's a good thing to remember as we move into the negotiations. And as I said, these twin summits of the UN, that UN and multilateral cooperation actually can deliver. We just need to make it deliver even better and faster.
Thank you, Pelle. And Shuva, the same question to you. What are the critical factors to encourage the global cooperation to achieve the goals outlined in the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that in the context of India's G20 presidency, which is going on right now. But before that, I want to just come back to what Pelle just said, that, when we do scenarios like 1.5 or 3 or whatever, these are built on certain business as usual modeling that we do. And there's something to be said for transformative change. And I'm old enough to have undergone several eras of that. I mean, I have lived in an era where we did not have cell phones, PCs, we had dial-up connections, we did not have 5G, 4G. The world has changed significantly in the last 25 years. So I have no reason to believe that we will not have a different world. And it could be a better world. It does not have to be a worse world. I think we need to kind of keep our perspective on the ability of human beings to innovate and to invent and to be creative and get out of problems. So I don't want to put this dampener that everything is lost. No, not at all. I mean, not from that point of view. Now, coming back to what India is doing this year, it's a big year for us. It's a 75th year of our independence, and it also coincides with the G20 presidency. My organization is advising our government on multiple tracks and across multiple ministries, which has given me sort of a ringside view into how the G20 negotiations happen. And now the G20 controls, I would say, or comprises of 80% of global trade and 80% of global GDP, and also 85% of global fossil fuel consumption and emissions. So they have both the good and the bad. But one good part of the G20 is that it has both developed countries and developing countries. And that is where the balancing act comes in between growth and emissions and so on and so forth. And when we are talking of the whole of economy change, only one economy cannot change. The world has to change in tandem as well. And that is where certain things like supply chains and value chains and product design. So if you see like an iPhone, it crosses country boundaries, jurisdictions, tens of times, maybe hundreds of times before it reaches your hand. And each country, each jurisdiction in that value chain is responsible for maintaining some part of that sustainability of that. So the responsibility is very collective. And so these countries, if you look at the 80-20 rule, I think it's usually the easiest way to get things done. G20 offers that 80-20 perspective of moving big change across global economies. So here is what we have: some pull and push things going on. Countries have their own priorities. They have their national circumstances. They have some are in debt, some are going into war, some are coming out of war. There's some are into COVID. All sorts of things are going on. And that really leads to, a whole different range of topics that are put on the table at any of these negotiating platforms. So finding common ground becomes a matter of compromise, which is not a bad thing, because, if we take entrenched positions, then we'll not be able to solve any of these problems. One of the things that India has introduced into the G20 agenda this year, and it's a national mission for us as well, is called LIFE, which is Lifestyle for Environment. And it's built on the concept of sustainable production and consumption. It has 3 pillars. One is to nudge behavior. And again, not individual, but country, community, city, all levels of behavior, which in turn leads to enabling markets. And this is where the private sector comes in, the industry, which is often left out of this conversation, or was seen as a villain of this piece, but they really are not, because they are also in the same ecosystem as the rest of us. So let's say all of us decide to become more sustainable, then who is supplying the goods, or who is running the markets that's supplying those sustainable items? And then the third pillar is influencing policy, which is at the national level, subnational level, but also the international policy. So the roles of international organizations, or IOs as we call them, the multilateral banking system, the UN system, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, all of these bodies, ILO, etc., where do they fit in? So this sort of, one is the UNFCCC process, one is the UN process itself, one is the security process, energy security, resource security, national security. All of these are issues that we have to look at. So multiple multilateral processes have to work with each other. And that is what we are really trying to do. So what happens is when governments talk to each other, it's called track 1, but there's a lot of value to track 1.5, which is government to industry, government to consumers, government to NGOs, or track 2 dialogues, which are happening between influencers. So I would encourage everyone to be a part of this parallel influencing conversations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuva. That was great. Thank you all for those insightful answers. So let us now move to some questions from the audience. I have seen that the chat is very active, so our speakers have triggered your interest. So I want to go to Jonathan first. So there's a question from Michelle, which I think you would like to respond to. What advice do you have to young people who are trying to continuously increase the reach of their sustainable impact?
I think the best advice I have is to get informed, to learn as much about the problem as possible. So you're already doing the right things by being here and being engaged in these issues. And I have a very, my interest in this work has to do with long-term quantitative tools that can help us think about the future. So we have a bunch of resources that allow you to analyze the long-term future. I'll put one in the chat, a very large tool that allows you to say, what if we reduce our consumption? What if we get really efficient at using resources? What if we invest more in renewable energy? What if we grow less? What if we prioritize education or health, right? Or these various sustainable development goals. And this tool is used quite a bit by groups in the United Nations and other areas. So this can be a resource that helps you think more about the long-term future as well. Perhaps as we continue the remainder of this conversation, I'll put some further links to the model that will show you some graphs that will maybe be relevant for your thinking as well. But getting into these kinds of tools allows you to shape your mental model. How do you think about the world and your position in it? And what kinds of choices we can make? What role multilateralism has? What role business has? What role government has? What role individual consumers have in this big process? And it can also, I think, shape realistic expectations. We are moving into a world of more climate change. I don't believe that we're going to be able to dramatically shift that with an additional 2 billion people and all of us looking to improve our lives as we should be. And so this creates fundamental challenges, and so get educated, and you're doing the right thing. Thank you, Butti.
Thank you, Jonathan. So let me now go to Indu. So the question from Mustafa: how can we encourage and finance young teenagers to participate in climate action activities?
I think the first step is what Jonathan rightly mentioned. I think once you kind of understand the entire the science and also the challenges and opportunities, I think a lot of focus has been on the challenges, the roadblocks, the barriers. But I think here is a narrative which gives you an opportunity to kind of see that in whatever spaces you're working in, irrespective of which part of the world, which sector, or which spaces that you identify yourself with, there is a lot of opportunity to kind of integrate climate action into it. So I think once we understand the interlinkages, the feedbacks, it's just a way to think. So I always say, it's an added lens to whatever work that we are engaged in. Use the climate lens and see, does it make sense? And the kind of what if scenarios that Jonathan said at C-STEP as well, we have our own homegrown model, which we call as Sustainable Alternative Futures. Right now it's for India. We'll be shortly developing for the African nations also, where we ask these questions. And then, there are levers that you can play with. And then what makes sense? Does it require doing something much more faster, or can it go slower? How do you achieve the developmental goals or the desired quality of life and yet move in a low carbon direction? And also the trade-offs and the synergies. I think that's where it's very, very important. So I think everybody who is trying to do work in that space, stop thinking in silos, stop thinking that, okay, this is the work that I'm doing. How do I understand climate action? I think there is a fine interconnection out there. The first thing is it's going to impact all of us. So I think we need to act in whatever small or big ways, in very different ways. And we can change the narrative, and more so the youth, the youngsters can change the narrative. A lot of us who are speaking may not live to see that, but we are really hopeful that that change will happen.
Thank you, Indu. So I can see a question here from Yadiki to Shuva. saying, should the more developed global north reduce growth to let the global south catch up?
It's not an either or. I have to be honest of that. Yeah, I mean, we can talk per capita usage of resources. I mean, the global north obviously uses far more than we do. But I think if we go towards an economic degrowth, it will also lead to job losses across even the global north. People will lose their jobs. We will lose their jobs, of course. And a lot of, if you go to see right now, the production consumption system in the world has shifted. So the global north does not produce a lot anymore. It's all been shifted to the global south. This is creating an emissions imbalance. Again, that's a different matter on how we account for emissions, etc. But if you just say that, okay, let's reduce, let's go for austerity, let's stop doing this, those are negative inducements. And I don't think we can get political will or public support for such measures. We need to, like I said, ingrain efficiencies into our processes. We need to weed out what is unnecessary. But what is necessary, it has to be there. Otherwise, the human success story will start devolving, and that is not our ambition. So the whole, why is the scenario saying 1.5, etc.? It's accounting for some amount of business as usual continuing. But yes, do we recommend waste to go away? Yes. You should not be wasteful, you should be mindful. So like our Prime Minister said, that we have to move from mindless consumption to mindful utilization. There's a difference between the two things. That would be my answer to this.
Absolutely, Shuva. We have a question from Granny for Pelle. So he's asking, what area have you seen the greatest progress in climate change activism over the years since you started?
Well, it's a bit of a tricky question. I mean, when it comes to activism, as I said in my earlier intervention, I think the whole youth mobilization effort that has been done is what is putting a lot of pressure on political decision makers. So I think that's what is the most significant change. When I was involved in the 90s, and you didn't have those movements on the streets outside the conference of the parties. So I think that's a really significant change and a very important, and you need to keep up, keep demanding decisiveness of the political leaders of the countries. So I think that's one thing. But I also would like to interpret that question a bit broader than just activism, because I think one of the major shifts and is really that renewable energy is becoming cheaper. Jonathan was talking about technological change, and I think this is a significant change, because at least in my view, the whole energy is the basis for our development, and that change, moving away from fossil fuels into renewable energy, I mean, that is what is creating this hope now as well. And I know that that Shuva and her team, they're working hard to promote solar energy development in India, and the cost of producing solar energy is really going down, and it will go down further. And I think that's another ray of big hope for us in the future.
Thank you, Pelle. Indeed, the prices of the wind and solar energy have dropped from 2009 by 90%. So more investments need to be done. Back to Jonathan. So building on what if scenario to avoid hitting planetary boundaries that you mentioned, and what will take it, and how do we influence key decision makers to take these actions?
I think the first thing that I would want to recognize is that we don't actually know what planetary boundaries are, that we don't know what that actual limit is. And that's a huge problem. It would be really great to know if we had this much consumption, if we destroyed this much environment, if we had this much ecological breakdown, then human development won't work anymore. Some people think that we've already passed planetary boundaries. I simply just don't know. If I knew, I would probably make much more informed decisions about my future and the future of people in the world. So how do we think about the relationship between, say, biodiversity and human development. How willing are we as a human species to continue to reduce biodiversity in order to keep growing and keep our future livelihoods increasingly wealthy with an additional 2 billion people on the planet? These are questions that I don't think we have, that we often have honest conversations about, because there are trade-offs in development. As all of the speakers have noted, this is a completely deeply interconnected world, and people who live in different countries are not different humans. They're all the same human beings working in the same place, living in different artificial state boundaries, right? So we're all in this together, right? There are long histories that we have to reconcile with, where people in the global north exploited people in the global south. And this leads to wealth accumulation and inequality and the whole climate justice problem in the first place. So this is not just connected right now. We're not just connected across the earth, but we're also connected with our histories and our pasts as well. And our futures are also deeply intertwined. India should develop. People in India, there are I don't have the number, I'll pull it up in a moment, 100-some million people in extreme poverty in India, and that should not be the case. In 1990, there were about 400 or 500 million people in China who were in extreme poverty, and the Chinese government, through redistributive policies, reduced that number down to basically zero today. So it's possible to make transformational changes in how development happens. At the same time, China became the world's largest carbon emitter. So these are deeply connected problems, and I think we need to recognize that first. It doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying to find a way to balance human development and environmental systems and reduce our footprint. Use smarter materials. Don't just throw things away immediately. You can reduce your individual footprint, but the broader societal transformation is still something I think we're really hoping for a magical solution to. And I think that that's what we need to work towards. And that magical solution is what Pelle mentioned, this transformation, this reduced cost of solar, the reduced cost of wind, like finding ways to be ethical in the ways we source those materials, and moving in a way where our individual consumption of fossil fuels reduces to the point where it's eliminated. But in all the work we do, it would suggest that that's not going to happen for a long time. And in that period, we're going to still see increases in climate change, which means we also have to be promoting the Sustainable Development Goals and figuring out how we can adapt in this changing world and making sure we're making decisions inclusively. It's not just you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. You have to walk and chew gum and have an umbrella and talk on the phone and know where you're going and look out for the future and the past. It's everything. And that's really the fundamental challenge of all of these pieces. One final word. If people give you simple solutions to these problems, I think you should always, as a younger generation, question them and problematize them and keep pushing forward, while also making sure you're understanding how you think about your place in this global system as well. And quantitative tools can help, but they're not a perfect solution for sure. Anyway, thank you, Butti.
Thank you, Jonathan. Indeed, the comprehensive solution for climate need to be there. Indu, I have a very interesting question around gender and climate. So we know that climate crisis will affect women and girls. What are the best tactics to involve women and girls in the design and the implementation of climate policies, and to ensure the benefits of climate action are equally shared?
Wow, that's a loaded question for sure, but there are concerted efforts, not necessarily in climate action, but I think let's look at the the larger space itself. There is a gender imbalance, any space that you take. So I guess for the first thing is we need to address that, and then comes climate action. It's just a very small, minuscule subset. So I think rather than thinking how do we make sure women get into the policy making, or how do they kind of get into the climate action, I think let's look at how do we get them into being educated, having the access to the information that's there, general information in the first place, or healthcare, and then, climate action will follow. So that's the way to think. But of course, that said, I think being sensitive to the needs of women, or gender, gender sensitive, is definitely very, very important in climate action. Because when you try to if you belong to the technology space, always be mindful that technology could be used very differently by various genders. And also, there are certain limitations of certain things. So I guess we need to be cognizant of the basic differences that exist. Equality is different from the inherent differences or how people imbibe certain technologies, policies, or actions. So I think if we can tweak that, if we can get people to understand that, then probably, yes, there is a way to ensure that we do bring in policies and action that are gender sensitive, and hopefully more and more women will also get into the space. There are quite a few women who are doing their bit, but I think we need a lot more. Let's not make it a gender problem here. Climate action has to happen overall, men or women or children or transgender. Let's accept that all of us need to act in our own individual spaces and as communities.
Thank you, Indu. We have a very interesting question on green jobs. I would refer to Shuva. So you mentioned that we should think of all jobs as green jobs. And how do you hope that India will take this idea forward during the G20 presidency?
Yeah, so when we and take over from what Indu ma'am was saying actually at this point, that whenever we get into binaries, right, we are isolating something or the other. So global north, global south, fossil fuel, non-fossil fuel, gender here, youth, not youth, old, etc. So similarly, green jobs, like if we say that, okay, only installing solar panels is a green job, then what happens to manufacturing of steel or the diodes or the electronics that are going into the solar panel? I mean, those also need to be green, right? Those value chains also have to be green for you. So before we go to the G20, what India has started doing, and the UN is also doing something, it's called the UN Energy Compact Program for that matter, in which India is one of the global champions for energy transition, where we have involved all the companies, the corporates, to look up and down, upstream and downstream of their value chains and educate. Not only, see, the big companies know what to do. They have the resources, they have the technological know-how, they are world informed, their leadership is very globally informed, but the small and medium businesses aren't. And India has 63 million small and medium, and SMEs, we call them MSMEs, micro businesses. And now if you see the value chain of, let's say, solar panel, you'll see that the nuts and bolts and things are being made by very, very small companies running diesel generators in some shanty town somewhere or the other. And it's very important to carry them along as well on this journey. And they may not have the technological know-how. They operate on very small profit margins. They are not registered. They're informal businesses. So India has now started registering these people. We are extending financial help. Many of them cannot have securities against large grants or large loans and debts. Many of them are defaulting on that. How do you solve? These are societal problems as well, because when COVID happened, we saw so many small businesses lose their livelihoods. So now you can say, okay, did green jobs lose their livelihoods or did normal jobs lose their livelihoods? That's not a conversation we can have. And that carries forth to the G20. Like I said, the supply chains are not national. They're not restricted by boundary. Neither is climate change, nor are resources. So when we are importing, exporting resources, that process has to be green. When we have people being trained, we keep talking of technology exchange, collaboration, co-development, etc. What does that mean? That means different countries are working together on the same problem, so their people are being skilled together. So that's another step to it. So at every point, we cannot divide, like say, this is my problem, that is your problem, this is what I'm doing, that country is doing that, and that is not that's not going to help us.
Thank you, Shuva. So now we will move to the final fire round with a question posed to all our speakers. So I think you touched on this question, and ahead of the COP28, what key priorities should we collectively push to ensure that the first global stocktake produces a meaningful outcome? and sets the stage for greater climate ambition for the years ahead. Jonathan, we can start with you if you don't mind.
Sure. I think it has to be a renewed effort at deepening multilateral connections and multilateral tools, and countries need to work together to really set the incentives. And I think setting the incentives means increasing the ability of renewable energy to be transformational in how we live. And yes, I agree, making sure we identify the greenness in everything that we're doing. But the real transformation has to be technological if we're adding 2 billion people and will continue to develop. So yeah, I think that that's the best path forward, but it's going to be fraught with challenges.
Pelle, what do you think? How can we push to ensure that the first global stake produces a meaningful outcome?
No, but I think this has been a fascinating discussion. It's been great to be part of it. And I think one key message that has really gone through is that we cannot talk about singular things. And so betting everything on COP28 or COP29, as I said, I was at COP3 and I was hoping things. So, you know, the two big summits I mentioned earlier, the SDG summit is one very important moment. The next year's summit of the future is another very important moment. So we need to keep on working with all these moments and to keep up the pressure. I raised my finger a bit earlier, Butti, when Shuva was talking about the green jobs, because I just wanted to add one example of what she was saying, that this is either not a singular thing. We were discussing the other day an initiative by the UN Foundation to support green shipping lanes, which is going on within the International Maritime Organization. And we started imagining ourselves, you know, where will the new ports be, where you fuel the ships that have been rebuilt in shipyards with fossil fuel free steel or green steel, and where is that hydrogen produced that is going to fuel those ships, and what do we do with the excess of heat that comes out of the production of green hydrogen? You know, you start thinking and you get all these new opportunities of jobs. You can start building greenhouses in the desert with warm water, and so this green economy is a dynamic economy. It's going to create jobs in places we don't really understand yet. So I think that's the hope that we should see going forward.
Thank you, Pelle. Shuva?
Coming to your COP28 question, our CEO was part of the UN Secretary General's committee with non-state actors. And while the countries do their negotiations inside the closed doors, G20, COP28, doesn't matter what they're doing, non-state actors, which is people outside, which is the general public, the media, the NGOs, the foundations, and everybody, like the citizenry, we have an equal role to play in making sure that we are invested in these conversations, and a lot of work has been done by the Indian government in making sure that the public sort of is aware of the G20. There's a lot of public branding in the cities. General people are like, they don't know what is G20, but they know there's something like a G20. And that is very important to draw people into it. And one of the comments that came from one of the country participants during one's working group meetings was that they said that, you know, the UN SDGs, how many common people know about it, understand it, have engaged with it? It's something that has been restricted to governments, to the intelligentsia. It never touched the people and in the real sense. So they were saying, we hope Mission Life manages to kind of cut through the masses and get to the people. That is one part of it, the role of non-state actors in such sort of negotiation processes. The other thing in any sort of stock take, and whether it's carbon pricing or taxation or global per capita emissions, this or whatever, is to agree on what we are measuring and against what, and who is measuring whom. And we need to come to an agreement of these standards of measurement. So what, you know, works for the global north, and that goes to whether the global north should stop using. No, I don't think they should stop using, but should they be using 16 times what the global south is doing? Probably not. And that is the sort of, equation we need to come to. What are we stock taking? What are we measuring?
Thank you, Shuva. Indu?
Yeah, I think a lot has been covered. So just my piece of to add to the conversation, I would think more effective climate justice mechanisms. I mean, there's a lot out there, but they've not exactly achieved what they've been charted out for. So I think that's something that should be ensured. And of course, adaptation fund, its flow, the mechanisms, and of course, loss and damage is a very touchy issue still. I mean, there was some conversation that was initiated, but a lot is still, left to be done. So I think that's really somewhere that COP28 should, move towards. And of course, last but not the least, mechanisms to unlock more private sector investments. I think that's also something which is very, very important. One, not waiting for just global north should pay, global south shouldn't do anything. That's one kind of a debate that goes on. The other is government should do everything. The private sector can go on doing certain things. And then again, individual versus communities, government versus citizenry. So I think we need to kind of put that aside and believe and act together for a cause, which is keeping the planet intact, which is the Mother Earth, which is supporting all the life, and which is what all of us are dependent on. I think if we can get that action, if we can kind of do individual action and then build on it slowly, COP28, yes, that's a high-level negotiation. It will continue to happen. As Pelle said, he was part of COP3. I wasn't very far behind him in age, I think, because I was part of COP8. But still, we're still kind of following the COP, and there seems to be a lot still unresolved. So I think, there is a lot that can be done. So, and also restricting this conversation around the November, December, when there's so much of flurry about, climate action, etc. If there are people in the audience who are from the media, journalists, I think you need to be talking about environmental issues, the science behind climate, build awareness, build stories, give a human touch to the stories. I think that's what will bring about action. Thank you.
Thank you, Indu. Shuva, I think you have
just no, because this COP thing is going on and we're talking binaries, and this is a question that was brought out by the UAE delegation, because they've been meeting people about COP28, and they were like, why do we have the blue zone and the green zone? That itself is excluding two types of conversations, that the serious people are in the blue zone, you need accreditation. And Pelle, maybe you want to weigh in on this, and all of you people, the other people who are not the negotiations, you are in the green zone. So we need to break these silos of thinking. And this is not my thought, it's come from the team that's organizing COP28, so maybe we'll see some change over there.
Thank you, Shuva. So I would like to have any reflection from the speakers. So let me go to Jonathan first. So Indu, Jonathan and Indu, what are your, if you have any final thoughts on any of the questions that we asked before, or any of the points before we move to the closing?
No, I think these are the conversations that should be happening, though. And I think we need more of these, and bringing together different actors across academic, government, NGO, private sector. Like, we need to get on the same page with what's going on and how we can make a better future for all of us. But thank you all for the opportunity to speak today.
I mean, I agree with Jonathan. I think we need to have more of these conversations where, it's not restricted to only who people work in the space, but people who are impacted, who are fearing that that's going to impact their future, or people who are doing whatever small action that they are doing. So I think these conversations have to happen year-round, rather than, when there is a huge rush towards something that's culminating very soon. So that's all. And I think it's a very enriching conversation. I really would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's been wonderful listening to other speakers and the very interesting, very enriching questions from the audience as well.
And I would just like to say thank, and it's been a big brainstorm, and we must make a lot more storm to make this happen. And there are many issues, but I think I enjoy my job, I enjoy my journey. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I want to say that it's not. And I think you know what Jonathan said, he really raised the bar for inspirational talk, I think, over here. But everybody needs to feel part of the community. We are part of the global community, and we are in this together. And I don't think people should feel out of the process. They should not feel that, oh, they're not listening to me, my voice is not being heard. And we must create these platforms to give them those voices, and not just youth, not just women, everybody needs to have a say in this thing.
Thank you so much, our speakers. So just to wrap up everything, Jonathan spoke about the climate and development nexus. Indu spoke about the hope for all the youth and who will live to see the future, and also making this problem not only for gender, but overall. Shuva spoke about moving from mindless consumption to mindful utilization. And finally, Pelle jumped into to share big moments in the year and his experience with since the COP3 till today. Thank you so much for having your time to share with the youth your inspirations, your experience. Pelle, I would refer to you for final remarks before we end.
I just wanted to pick up one of the questions that was in the chat that I think is really important, which we haven't really touched on, and that's about education. We need to also to continue to educate our young people through the education system about these issues. We need to keep on investing in young people, and the education system is so important that they bring these issues up. So, and that also brings together what we have been talking about, the SDGs. It's about implementing the full program of the development goals. So sorry for interrupting you, Butti, but I felt that was a missed point, and that I wanted to bring forward. Very glad to have been part of this panel. Thanks, Butti.
Indeed, Pelle, education and awareness is very important. It's the core of any movement in sustainability or in climate specifically. So thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget to follow us on social media and connect with different innovators we have. The post we had in our social media platforms, in Instagram as well, will be awarded the Mobilizer Award at the Big Pitch on the 28th. Help them to rally young people around the solutions. To join us at the Big Pitch on the 28th of February, please scan the code or visit ourfutureagenda.org/bigbrainstorm. To join any of our future spotlight sessions happening every week at 9 a.m. till the Big Pitch via the following link you will see on the screen. On Monday, we'll have our final spotlight on future generations. Thank you so much again for our incredible speakers and to all of you joining.
Thank you so much, and great job, Butti. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Butti. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye. Good night. Good night.
Good night.